Wow, good morning, everybody. Is there anyone there? Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Right, good. It's fantastic to be here in Budapest. What an amazing city. So much to like about Budapest. The architecture, this amazing theatre. Isn't it fantastic? And the baths and the paprika and the goulash and the palinki. Fantastic. The less we say about unicum, the better. As a leader, are you going to step forwards or step back next? That's the question I want to ask today. As a leader, are you going to step forwards or step back next? Because that's the question I think good leaders are asking themselves all the time. Are you going to step forward or step back next? And I want to expand on that dance of stepping forwards and back today. The good news is that you already know how to do it. There's some people talking behind me on the stage that's a bit disconcerting. Guys, thank you. So, who's here? Give me a wave. If you work for a company, a big company, put your hand up, give me a wave. Excellent. Thank you. Hello there. If you work for yourself or a very small group company, put your hands up. A few of you guys out there. Excellent. If you work in the IT field or something connected to that, give me a wave. Oh, lots of you. Excellent. Very good. If you manage people already, give me a wave. Yes. Excellent. Lots of you. If you would call yourself a leader already, give me a wave. Okay. Lots of you. Excellent. If you would like to be a better leader, give me a wave. Okay. Excellent. You're all in the right place then. Good, good, good. Who's seen me speak before? Oh, excellent. Right. So now I can say the same jokes as I usually say. That's excellent. All right. Leading as a host. It's a metaphor. It's a dance, and it's a model. And today I'm going to tell you about the metaphor and the dance a little bit. The model will probably have to wait for another time. I thought about this metaphor originally on Monday, the 17th of February, 2003, at 11:30 in the morning. I was attending a seminar on systemic structural constellations in family and organizational change by Matthias Varga von Quebec. One or two of you might even know Matthias, a very bright guy. And he, as part of this seminar, said, there's an old Arabic proverb. The host is both the first and the last. The host is both the first and the last. And I thought immediately, that's the leader, isn't it? The leader is both the first and the last. And I started thinking about this idea of host and leader being combined. And we'll talk more about host in a moment, but a host is somebody who entertains guests, right? If you give a party, you are a host, and you entertain your guests. And of course, the host has to be first, because somebody has to arrange the food and set up the room and make the invitations and welcome the people. And the host also has to be the last, because when all the guests have gone, somebody has to clear up and sort it out and turn the lights off and everything. But it's much more fundamental than that. Being first is about stepping forward. Being last is about serving others and stepping back yourself. And let's explore what we mean by those different things. And why is this important? Because of the way that organizational life is changing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but the challenges facing leaders today, 2017, 2016, these are very different, even to the challenges facing leaders 20 years ago, never mind 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And a lot of the leadership wisdom that is around was developed 50 or 100 years ago. And in those days, the leader was the only one who had all the information, the only one who understood the big picture, the only one who could communicate with everybody. Today, completely different. Everyone has all the information. Everyone can communicate with everybody. And everything moves much faster as a result. I don't need to tell you this, you know it. Also, we have now then the rise of these ideas like wicked problems and the VUCA world. The VUCA world a world which is ambiguous and complex and uncertain. And we are facing challenges right now, particularly in the face of, in my country, Brexit, Trump in the USA. Very, very big uncertainty challenges like we haven't faced in a generation. And then we have the idea of wicked problems. A wicked problem being something that is different to a tame problem. Who knows the distinction between tame and wicked problems? Okay, it's worth me telling you a little bit then. A tame problem is a problem that you can sort of put clever people in a room and they will solve it. It's kind of well boundaried and well defined, and with clever people you can sort it out. A wicked problem, the boundaries are very, very fuzzy. With a wicked problem, it's very interconnected with lots of other things. So you may be able to do something about one place, but then there will be unintended consequences in other places. And things like managing healthcare, climate change, international banking, these are all wicked problems. They cannot be solved, they can only be worked with. So now we need leaders who can start to engage people around these things. The job of the leader is not anymore to solve the problem. The job of the leader is to engage people around the problem. And that's the change I'm talking about between hero and host. So, towards the end of this talk, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of thinking about a real leadership challenge. So let me ask you this now. Start thinking about a real leadership challenge that you're facing. Maybe not big, I don't know. Maybe big. Who knows? A real thing that you're facing that you want to, about leading other people, that you want to kind of make some progress with today. So just start thinking about that. And towards the end of my talk today, I'm going to do a little bit of work with you on this topic. So just start thinking about that right now. Okay. So I said at the beginning, this idea of this spectrum of this dance of leadership. Stepping forwards. On this side, stepping back over here. And there are lots of times when, as leaders, we want to step forward. When we want to be up front. When we want to be going first. When we want to be showing the way. When we want to be confident. When we want to be showing how it's going to happen. Leading by example. Lots and lots of times we might want to do that. And I think there are also lots and lots of times when stepping back as a leader is important. And when we step back, what are we doing? Well, I think we are being aware. We are observing what's going on. We're gathering information. We're talking to people quietly. We're seeing what's happening. We're noticing how things are developing. And this is a very valuable place to be as a leader, because then it tells us, when we want to step forward again, how to do it, where to do it. And this idea of stepping back as a leader is relatively new. Not completely new, but relatively new. The idea that leaders don't always step forward. Sometimes we step back as well. And to illustrate that, here are 7 leadership dilemmas. These were researched by Ashridge Business School in the United Kingdom. They went out and talked to leaders a couple of years ago about what challenges leaders faced right now. And what came back with this series of dilemmas. A dilemma is you have this and you have the opposite. And it seems impossible to do both. So here they are on the screen. I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but have a look at the top couple, for example. The dilemma of direction. You're supposed to imagine a better future. That's part of leadership. Everyone says you should imagine a better future, which is something to do with stepping back and being imaginative and open. And also, you're supposed to keep focused on progress, which is very much a kind of stepping forward idea. The dilemma of timing. On the one hand, you should wait and see and observe and see what's happening and pick your moment. And on the other hand, you should accelerate progress. We can't afford to hang around. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. So, all of these dilemmas actually take the form, should I step back or should I step forward? And so the way to resolve this as leaders is not to see this as a dilemma. It's not a choice, either or. You have to do both. But the question is, ladies and gentlemen, when to do them. When to do them. When to step back. When to step forward. And this is the dance of the host leader. So let's look now at a little bit about leadership and a little bit about leadership as relationships. I want to suggest to you this morning that leadership and leading is a relationship, not a role. You talk about the leader is a person, all big and strong. But leading is a relationship. You need two people, at least. Leader and the other one. And all the different forms of leadership imply already a relationship. But we don't often think about it like that. So let's examine 3 popular leadership metaphors and see what that has to say to us about the relationship that's implied between the leader and the other one. And the first one I want to look at is the very, very famous and obvious leader as a hero. Leading as a hero. The step forward model of leadership. And this has been in human society since the beginning of time. The idea of the leader as a hero. And it's a very compelling idea. The leader is the top of the pyramid, the top of the pile. The leader knows more, is cleverer, is braver, is stronger. The leader will save us. The leader will save the day. Superman. Yeah? Winston Churchill in my country. Other people, I'm sure that you have your own examples. Hero leaders. And we like to look up to hero leaders and put our trust in them. There's a problem, though, with the relationship. If the leader is the hero, then who are the others? Who are the others? If the leader comes along as the hero and, like Superman, saves the city, saves the day, who are the other people? They are the ones who are saved. They are the rescued people. And the way you get rescued properly is to do what the hero tells you and not ask questions. So now, in a crisis, I think this can work quite effectively. But as the basis for an ongoing leadership relationship, I don't think it's a very good one. Because what happens, and you may have experienced this yourselves, is that the rescued people enjoy being rescued and they wait around to be rescued again and again and again. And the hero likes rescuing people, so they get to rescue people again and again and again. And the relationship becomes one of dependence. We'll sit around and wait for the hero to do something. And that's not, I think, a way of developing a good, ongoing, generative, working relationship between the leader and the others. And in the leadership literature, the hero-leader model has been dismissed for many decades now. But it's still there, it's still out there, because it's a kind of part of our human culture. Now, there has been already one very significant attempt to do something very different to that. And some of you may have come across Robert Greenleaf's work on leading as a servant. Who's come across the idea of servant leadership before? Well, some of you have. Good, good. So, Robert Greenleaf was an American, and he produced this fantastic counterblast to the leader as hero. And he said, no, let's turn everything upside down. The leader should be the servant of their organization. So we have, as you see on the screen, the triangle upside down, the leader supporting and serving. And that's a fantastic idea too. It's a fantastic idea too, that the leader should serve and support their organization. And it's been around about 30 or 40 years now, this model. And to be honest, I think it hasn't caught on as much as I would have liked. I think there are some practical difficulties with it. One of the difficulties is that nobody really has servants anymore, so we don't understand the metaphor. At least I don't have servants. I don't know, maybe you do. But if you watch TV shows like Downton Abbey from the UK, you know, from 100 and something years ago, people had servants then. And so you either had a servant or you were a servant. And so you understood how the servant relationship worked, and we don't understand that now. Secondly, a lot of women and other people who are traditionally cast into lower roles, service roles, are eager for something new. They don't want to be told suddenly, oh, you're in a service role, but actually that's leadership. They don't want to do that. And then there's the question of the relationship again. If the leader is the servant, then what's the counterpoint of that? What's the other part of that in language? If we have a servant, then we must also have a master. The servant and the master. And people say, well, if the leader is the servant, then the organization is the master. Accountability? Where is that? What's going on here? And of course, Greenleaf intended this to be a puzzle. He didn't intend it to be an easy answer. He intended it to, make us think very hard about these things. And in literature, the servant and master is actually a very complex relationship. Some of you may have read Don Quixote and Sancho Panza and the relationship between them. Other examples in literature, in opera, in Shakespeare, and so on, of master-servant relationships, and they're very complex. But we struggle with it as a leadership idea, because I think the relationship seems unclear, or doesn't seem to fit. So let me suggest now the third model for us, which is the leader as a host. And the leader as a host is someone who steps forward and steps back. And as you see from the picture, we don't now have a triangle, we have a circle. And the host being the one who is bringing people together into the circle, engaging people into the circle. And this idea of hosting is something that we can do all the time. We all know how to do it at one level. We've all had a party. We've all invited people to our house for dinner or something. So actually it's very familiar, but we don't think about it in terms of leadership. And I'll unpack that in a moment. But let's think about the relationship again. If the leader is now a host, then who are the others? Well, they are the guests, exactly. The others are the guests. And the host and guest is the relationship. So let's just remind ourselves, we had the hero and the rescued people, not very good. We had the servant and the master, confusing. We have the host and the guest. Now this ladies and gentlemen, is a relationship that's worth exploring in leadership terms. And if we go back to the idea of wicked problems for a moment, one of the leading authors on wicked problems, Keith Grint, has written this about leadership in the modern age. He writes, "The uncertainty involved in wicked problems means that leadership, as I am defining it, is not a science but an art, the art of engaging a community in facing up to complex collective problems." The art of engaging a community in facing up to complex collective problems. And this idea of engaging a community, this for me is hosting, absolutely. Engage a community. Bring people together. So, let us then examine this metaphor in a bit more detail. What do we mean by a host? Well, one of the kinds of people, when I say host, people think about images like this idiot up here. And it's the game show host, yeah? And we all see these kind of people on TV all the time, and they're called hosts. Because in a way they're hosts, but actually that's not really what I'm talking about. The role of the host is, in the dictionary definition, a person who receives or entertains guests. So the host and the guest are co-defined. You can't have a host without guests. You can't have guests without a host. And if we think about the idea of modern hosting, I mentioned we invite people around to our house, perhaps, for a meal. We invite them for a party. We organize a big gathering to celebrate a family event or something, a wedding, perhaps. This is all hosting, yes. But hosting goes back thousands of years into biblical times and beyond. And a hosting culture still exists in the parts of the world where the environment is very tough. So places like the desert, the steppes, the tundra, the plains. The people who live in these places have always had hosting cultures. And what that means is, if you live in the desert like these guys, and you meet a stranger, you immediately invite them into your tent and offer them tea and offer them food before you even ask who they are or where they're going. Before you ask who they are or where they're going. You must support and greet your fellow human being. And in these places, it's a matter of survival. As part of writing the book Host that was mentioned earlier, I talked to a lot of interesting people. And one of them was a guy called Tim Cope, who wrote a book called On the Trail of Genghis Khan, where he followed the route of Genghis Khan on a bicycle. This guy is crazy, right? Through Mongolia and across Afghanistan and those plains of Central Asia on a bicycle. And he met a lot of the indigenous people who live in those places, very tough places. And he says, hospitality is the linchpin of survival on the steppe. In the desert of Kazakhstan, it was reaching 50 degrees centigrade outside during the day. It's an environment with no trees for thousands of miles, not much water. I had to ride by night and then find somewhere to shelter. It was a matter of life and death. These people, with no obligation to me, took me into their underground huts. I'd be wined and dined on fermented camel's milk. They took me in like their long-lost son. So that is a hospitality culture, where you greet the stranger like your long-lost son. And of course, we don't have to do that now because we live in easier places and we have things like hotels and other ways of carrying out hospitality. But in the real hospitality cultures, Hospitality is not simply about inviting your friends around. It's about how you engage with the stranger, how you engage with the other, as some people say, how you engage with the other. And in many ways, it's something that we are losing, I think, this art of engaging with strangers. And in some ways, I would say that the Brexit crisis and the Trump crisis, if it's a crisis, these are to do with people being afraid of strangers at some level. And by developing a hospitality culture, or more of a hospitality culture, we can begin to reach out and understand and engage with other people who we don't know and maybe we don't trust. And when the nomads in the desert offer the tea and the food before they even ask, who are you or where you're going? Why do they offer the tea first before they ask the question? Because the tea must not depend on the answer to the question, who are you? Because if you say, who are you, and then give you tea, you can say, who are you? Oh, actually, I don't like you. I'm not going to give you tea. The tea must become first. And that's the beginning of a hosting culture. And by the way, this photograph, taken a very few years ago out in the deserts in Egypt, could have been taken 3,000 years ago, apart from there's a plastic water can there, right? There's a plastic water can there. Everything else in that picture could have been 3,000 years ago. You can't see the Toyota Land Cruiser that's just off the shot to the left. So those cultures have sustained on that basis. And this word, the original word of host in Indo-European, which is the language that came before all the European languages, the word is hosti. And this word means host and guest and stranger all at once. It's very, very interesting. Host and guest and stranger is all the same word. So this is about how do we reach out, how do we engage. It's a much, much bigger question than how do we invite people around for dinner, but it's the same kind of question. And the answers are similar as well. Well, one little example about what a good host does comes from the history of my own country, the United Kingdom. And one of the longest reigning monarchs of the United Kingdom was Queen Victoria. And she was queen from 1837 to 1901. And for much of her reign, two politicians took it in turn to be prime minister. On this side, William Gladstone, and on the other side, Benjamin Disraeli. And the Queen met them both many times. And she wrote in her own diaries, "When I have dinner with Gladstone, I come away thinking that he is the most clever, witty, and sophisticated person in the country. But when I have dinner with Disraeli, I come away thinking that I am the most clever, witty, and sophisticated person in the country." And I think this shows that Disraeli is clearly the better host. Because what hosts do is step forward and then step back. Make things happen and then serve. Make things happen and then serve. This dance of stepping forward and stepping back. And if you step forward all the time, you end up being a Gladstone and looking very clever. If you know when to step back and help other people do things, you end up being a Disraeli. So, having had this original idea, as I told you, on Monday the 17th of February 2003, I then spent more than a decade going around and trying to figure out, what do good hosts do? What do good hosts do? And I interviewed many, many people some of whom I thought were great leaders who seemed to me to be acting in a hosting way. Others were great hosts who ran places like top hotels and restaurants, who were very interested in the idea that what they did was leadership, and learned a great deal. And in the end, it came out, and the person in the red jacket at the top there is Helen Bailey, who's my co-author on this book, Host. And some of these people you may recognize, and many of them you won't. One you might recognize, Chris Anderson of TED. I think he's a fantastic host leader in many, many ways. It's very, very interesting to watch him up close at TED events and see how he does that, both in terms of being very, very organized and structured, but also very, very hands-on and available and part of the group at TED events, for example. So, a long process of unpacking what being a host means, and I don't have time to tell you all of that this morning. But one of the things I've discovered was that being a host is, first of all, comes from your mind. You think of yourself as a host. And then you think of the others as your guests. And then somehow you know already what to do. Now, we can learn more about that and we can refine our skills in host leadership. Yes, of course. But fundamentally, we already know something about how to be a good host. And this idea of thinking of myself as a host is a big piece of the story. And there is no better example of someone who knew how to think of himself as a host than this guy. This is Nelson Mandela, of course. And these are pictures from his youth, relatively speaking. As a young man, he was a very keen amateur boxer. He was a lawyer, one of the first black lawyers in Cape Town. And then, of course, he was tried for treason, sent to prison. And there's one of the very few photographs of him in prison, engaged in hard labor, breaking rocks. And again, throughout his life, Mandela reached out to the people he should have hated. He reached out to his captors, his dominators, his tormentors, and engaged with them. When he could have been forgiven for just kind of saying, no, I hate you guys, I want to kill you. And one wonderful example of that comes from the day he was taken to prison, 1964, taken off to Robben Island, and asked to see his lawyer. And so the request goes out for the lawyer to come visit. And 2 weeks later, the lawyer is allowed to visit Mandela in prison on Robben Island. And the lawyer is sent, whose name is Bezos, not the Amazon Bezos, another one, sent into this room to wait for Mandela. And Mandela is escorted in to the room, surrounded by 8 guards, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like a Roman formation. And they all walk in like this, and this group stops, and the lawyer has never seen anyone being escorted like this before. And he doesn't know what to say. The guards just stand there. And so Mandela breaks the silence and says, Jeff, allow me to introduce you to my guard of honor. And he begins to introduce the guards to the lawyer. And he's introducing them in Afrikaans, which is their language, not his, because he's been learning it. And he knows a little bit about each guard, like if he has children, which rugby team he supports. And so he introduces each of these 8 guards to the lawyer. And the guards are very unaccustomed to this. They never get introduced to criminals' lawyers. But of course, what do you do if you're politely introduced? You step forward and shake hands and everything. And of course, the atmosphere in the room is changed completely by Mandela thinking of himself as a host and doing what a host would do, which is introduce people to each other in their own languages. And it's a wonderful example, that of you think of yourself as a host and you can change your understanding of the situation. So let's try and do that now. Let's do that now, in fact, on that leadership challenge that I asked you to think about at the beginning of the session. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds now. Some people like to write this down or make notes on your PC or your tablet or whatever. Think of this leadership and management challenge that you're facing right now or you're about to face. Preferably something that's real and really matters to you. Make a note of it somehow and give it a name in your head. Give it a name, this challenge, okay? So I'm going to give you 30 seconds of silent thinking time to think of your challenge and give it a name, okay? Go. All right, so thinking about this challenge then. Now, think of yourself as the host in this situation. The first question is, who are your guests? I want you to think widely about this. Who are your guests? If you are the host in this situation, who are the guests? And there may be different groups of guests. I'm going to give you 30 seconds now to think about who are your guests, make a note of it, and think widely. Write them down. Okay, next stage. If they're your guests, then what are you hoping to encourage them to do? As the host leader, what are you hoping to encourage your guests to do? Once again, 30 seconds. Make a note of this. Okay, and the last part of the thinking process is this. In your role as a host leader, how might you support them in doing that thing? Doing the thing that you're hoping to encourage them to do. How might you support them as a host? Last 30 seconds of silent thinking time. Go. Okay, so well done. I'm going to give you now 1 minute to have a quick moment to share what you've been talking about, thinking about with a neighbour, and have a quick chat about what you've thought about, how you can encourage people as a host leader. 1 minute to have a chat with your neighbour. Go. Okay, everybody. I'm sorry to have to wind up this conversation, but time is pressing. So, it was mentioned earlier on that this book, Host, is called, it's subtitled 6 New Rules Crossed Out Roles of Engagement. And I just want to say a word about that before we have some time for questions. Rules, I think, are things you have to do all the time. And here's a set of rules I discovered in Santa Cruz Beach in the United States. No alcohol, no fires, no bikes, no skateboards, no dogs, don't field wildlife, and no fun either. So I don't like rules of leadership, but I do like roles. And a role is a way in which you can step forward, different ways of stepping forward when you need to as a host leader. And this is in this decade of thinking about this, talking to different people, we came up with this idea of 6 roles that host leaders fulfill when they have to. And very briefly, they're on the screen. They're the initiator role, about getting things going, the inviter role, about inviting other people to join in, the space creator role of creating a great environment and space that supports the thing you want to have happen, the gatekeeper role, which is about managing the boundaries and welcoming people across the boundaries. And I saw, by the way, one of the talks from yesterday talked about initiation into a group, and that's kind of part of that role, the gatekeeper role for me. The connector role, to do with introducing people to each other, helping people make good connections that will turn into something great. And finally, the co-participator role. This is the idea of being the host. You provide the food, but then you also have to eat it. Yeah? So you eat the same food as everybody else. You join in with your group as well as leading it. And that's something that is quite an innovation in host leadership and leadership terms. And I don't have the time to go into all these other things. They're all in the book. So before we wind up, we do have just 5 minutes left for questions. And there's also going to be a panel later on, I understand, which I will be a part of. So, but I'm very happy now at the moment to take any questions that anyone would like to ask.
Mark, we have a method that we use for questions.
You have a method?
Yeah.
Good. What's that?
Look behind you.
Okay.
I'm going to stick with the screen today because I was looking at the updated questions yesterday and that caused a little confusion. So, yeah, that's the first question, the blue one. A host-guest relationship seems weak by definition, is very limited in time. A guest comes, has fun and leaves, not suggesting involvement of none other part.
Yeah, I fundamentally disagree with that. I think a host-guest relationship, it can be short and transient, but it can also be extremely long and extremely strong and develop and grow. And I think we have to think carefully about what we mean by guest. And the concept of a hotel guest arrives and leaves, yes. But there's much more to the host-guest relationship than simply that. So I think, and also it's up to the host to build the relationship. It's up to the host to reach out. It's up to the host to engage and engage the guest. So the host, a good host leader, can build relationships that are as strong as they need. And that, of course, can happen over time.
How does responsibility come into that picture, though?
How does responsibility come into that picture? Mm-hmm.
With the host-guest relationship?
Well, the host is inviting people to be involved in something. Usually the host has started off by defining, but of course then as the other people get involved, maybe that thing changes and evolves and emerges. So it's a shared responsibility model, but the host is first in the sharing. The host convenes people around something that they think is important. And then that may change as we go along. So I think this model of leading as a host fits very well into models of distributed leadership, for example. I think anyone can think like a host in an organization. If you work with people, you can think as a host. If you work with customers, you can think as a host. If you work with service users, you can think as a host. If you work with suppliers, you can think as a host, right? That covers most people. So I think this is a very, very strong model for distributed leadership, if that's how we want to be. And anyone can start to do this. Anywhere in the organization, try it. Think of yourself as a host. Think of the other people as your guests. See what comes. And then you'll find new options, new ideas, new engagements.
Next one is a good practical question.
Yeah,
Many successful hero engineers are promoted into leadership. How does one best shed hero habits?
Yes, that's a really, really good question. Thank you for that. And absolutely, I'm very familiar with this, this thing myself. Originally, I should have said, I did a PhD in self-organizing systems in physics a long time ago. So I introduce myself sometimes now as a recovering physicist. I'm nearly better. Not quite. So I think thinking about yourself as a host is a great way of starting to shed some of those habits. And remember, it's not that hosts serve all the time. You know, this is not the kind of servant leadership model. Hosts get to be confident and upfront and lead the way sometimes when that's what needs to be done. So having the hero habits is half good, because you can do them then. The trick is to find sometimes when you don't do that. So the good news is it's not like giving up smoking when it's a kind of all or nothing thing. It's a kind of, you can introduce this stepping back, if that's what you decide you need to do, introduce the stepping back ideas into your repertoire gradually and see how that goes and get experience of that. And the host mindset that comes when you do that really, really helps along the way, I think. And that's what we find with organizations who, start to engage with these ideas. It looks like we're out of questions.
We always have a whole bunch of questions that don't get to be asked, but for those of you who came a little later, we're not going to have an open space because there are not enough topics, but we're going to have all the speakers, or as many as we can have, for the open space slot. That's about 75 minutes to answer most of the questions. So
just a quick word of closing, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me to be here today. I've mentioned the book, lots of blogs and stuff on the website, hostleadership.com. I'm on Twitter @thehostleader, and also we have a LinkedIn group. Just search for Host Leadership in LinkedIn, and that's open to anyone to join if you want to kind of engage with conversations around these ideas. So thank you very, very much indeed.
Mark, on behalf of the hosts, this is a present for you, and they are responsible for drawing you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That's fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you.
Let her take a picture of you.